It's 1862. There's a man who can't get out of bed. The air in his room is thick with despair. We would call it clinical depression. His young son has just died from a fever. His wife, mad with grief, is holding seances in the other room. His job is a complete and utter disaster. The project he's managing is failing catastrophically, costing thousands of lives, and everyone he respects is calling for his resignation. An entire country is collapsing around him, and in the dark, he feels like it's all his fault. He confides in a friend that he is the most miserable man living. That man was Abraham Lincoln, and the project he was managing was the American Civil War. But this story isn't just about him. It's about a question that once blew my own life apart and sent me on a journey to understand this universal feeling of being adrift. My name is Sam Carter, and what I found in the hidden struggles of history's most brilliant minds fundamentally changed how I see the world. The funny thing about feeling lost is that we think it's a sign that something is deeply wrong with us, a personal failure, a bug in our system. But this isn't another video filled with poetic platitudes about finding your path. I'm going to make an argument that feels counterintuitive, maybe even a little radical. I'm going to argue that feeling lost is not only normal, it's essential. To some extent, it's even healthy. To understand why, we need to look at two brilliant minds who found themselves in a similar darkness and the two psychological traps they fell into.
First, let's talk about the man who was supposed to be the heir to modern psychology, Carl Jung. In the early 1900s, Jung was Sigmund Freud's golden boy, his star protege, the man Freud himself called his eldest son and the crown prince of psychoanalysis. Jung's entire professional life, his identity, his future, it was all built on this relationship and this school of thought. But Jung started to have his own ideas that deviated from Freud's core tenets. He challenged the master, and the response was brutal. He was excommunicated from the inner circle. His mentor, his father figure, and his entire intellectual world turned against him. Overnight, he became a pariah, his life's meaning shattered. Think of your own life as a story you tell yourself.
For Jung, that story wasn't just wrong, it was torn apart, its central chapter erased. He was left in a void, staring at a terrifyingly blank page. He descended into what he would later call a period of creative madness. He quit his lecturerships, retreated from public life, and spent his days by a lake building miniature castles out of pebbles and mud. He had conversations with imaginary figures. From the outside, he looked like a man who had completely lost his mind. But here's the lesson. Jung wasn't adrift because his life was meaningless. He was adrift because the story of meaning he had no longer fit. He had to enter the void, the space between stories, to find a new one. Growth often feels like death before it feels like rebirth. He was learning how to hold a pen again, tentatively sketching the first words of a new, more authentic story, the one that would eventually become his life's work. That's the first trap, the broken story. Believing that because your old map is useless, the entire territory is empty. The second trap is illustrated by a man who couldn't be more different from the introspective Jung. The larger-than-life force of nature, Theodore Roosevelt. This is the man who was shot in the chest during a speech and finished it before seeking medical attention. The man who seemed carved from pure, unstoppable will. His identity was forged in the fires of public life, of heroism, of constant forward momentum. He lived for the applause, for the arena. But in 1912, after leaving the presidency, he ran for a third term and lost. And the applause stopped. The arena fell silent. The world moved on.
And suddenly, Theodore Roosevelt, the hero, became a historical footnote. This man of action was left with nothing to act upon. His entire sense of self was built on external validation, and when that validation was withdrawn, his identity collapsed. He wrote to friends about his private despair, the sleepless nights wrestling with his own irrelevance. His public face was still the booming, confident bull moose, but the private man was terrified. He had fallen into the comparison trap, but not just with others, with his own past. He measured the quiet of his present against the thunder of his past and found it lacking. In a desperate attempt to feel alive again, to write one more heroic chapter, he embarked on a suicidal journey through the Amazon to map an uncharted river, aptly named the River of Doubt. He nearly died from a leg infection and malaria, begging his son to leave him behind. He survived, but he was a shadow of his former self. Roosevelt's lesson is the trap of the empty applause. When your self-worth is tied to what other people think of you, you've handed them the power to destroy you. When the likes, the promotions, the praise disappear, so do you. Roosevelt measured himself against the applause of others. Today, we have likes, followers, and career ladders. Where in your life have you fallen into this comparison trap? Share your story in the comments below. So, we have Jung's crisis of meaning and Roosevelt's crisis of validation. Both are crises of loss. But what if your problem is the opposite? What if you're lost not from a lack of options, but from a surplus of them? What if you're paralyzed not by failure, but by having too many good paths to choose from? This brings us to our next brilliant mind, Charles Darwin, who found himself tormented by a question so painfully ordinary it almost drove him mad. Should I get married? This is the man who would fundamentally reshape humanity's understanding of itself. But in his late 20s, he was stuck. He could continue his life as a bachelor, free to travel, to dine with the cleverest men in London, to dedicate every waking hour to his science. Or he could marry his cousin, Emma Wedgwood, and have a family. Both were good options, and the choice was agonizing. So, in a move that is both deeply logical and slightly absurd, Darwin took out a piece of paper and made a pros and cons list. Under marry, he wrote children, a constant companion and a friend in old age, someone to take care of the house. And then the famously lukewarm endorsement, at any rate better than a dog anyhow. Under not marry, he wrote freedom to go where one liked, the conversation of clever men at clubs, not being forced to visit relatives, the loss of time. He worried a wife wouldn't like his science, writing, imagine a nice soft wife on a sofa, good for one's health perhaps, but not for one's work. This list is hilarious, but it reveals a profound and modern source of anxiety, the paradox of choice. The psychologist Barry Schwartz argues that while we think more options make us freer and happier, they often do the opposite. They lead to paralysis, anxiety, and dissatisfaction. The pain of closing the door on all the other what-ifs can feel more powerful than the joy of the path you actually choose. This paralysis, this high-quality problem of being lost in a sea of opportunity, can feel just as crippling as being lost in a desert of loss. Darwin eventually did choose. He wrote marry, marry, marry at the bottom of his note and proposed. He found his way not by keeping his options open, but by having the courage to close them. But the most dangerous, most insidious form of being lost doesn't come from a broken story, or empty applause, or too many choices. It comes after you've already won. It comes after you have reached the absolute summit. On July 20, 1969, Buzz Aldrin stepped out of the lunar module and onto the surface of the moon. He stood there in the magnificent desolation and looked back at the Earth, a beautiful, fragile blue marble hanging in the blackness. It is a peak of human achievement that may never be surpassed. But then comes the question that haunts every great achiever: what's next? For Aldrin, there was no next. There was no bigger goal. The highest high was behind him, and it broke him. He came back to Earth a hero, but inside he was completely and utterly lost. He spiraled. He fell into a deep depression, battled alcoholism. He blew through his money. In one of the most jarring images in modern history, the man who drove a spaceship on the moon ended up working as a Cadillac salesman in Beverly Hills. Can you imagine? The quiet desperation of trying to upsell someone on leather seats when you have stood in the silence of another world. His story is the ultimate tragic example of a psychological trap known as the arrival fallacy. This is the mistaken belief that achieving a long-sought-after goal will bring you lasting happiness and fulfillment. You know this feeling. It's the quiet melancholy after graduation day. It's the hollow "what now" after you finally get the promotion you worked years for. His story is the ultimate tragic example of a psychological trap known as the arrival fallacy. This is the mistaken belief that achieving a long-sought-after goal will bring you lasting happiness and fulfillment. You know this feeling. It's the quiet melancholy after graduation day. It's the hollow "what now" after you finally get the promotion you worked years for. It's the strange emptiness that descends after a wedding or after you finish a massive project. We are so focused on the destination that we have no plan for what to do once we arrive. Aldrin's story is our story, just written in capital letters across the surface of the moon. It teaches us the harshest truth. We are not creatures wired for arrival. We are creatures wired for the pursuit. When the pursuit ends, especially at the highest possible peak, our sense of purpose can shatter. So what do we do with all this? Lincoln's perseverance in the face of absolute despair. Jung's descent into madness to find a new story. Roosevelt's desperate chase for relevance. Darwin's paralysis of choice. Aldrin's tragic fall after reaching the summit. They show us that feeling lost is not a bug. It's a feature of the human condition. It's the inevitable friction that occurs when we are forced to grow. The path out isn't a magic formula, but the clues are there in their stories. It's a 4-step process, simple to understand, but emotionally difficult to execute. 1. Explore. When your old map is gone, you must wander for a while. Try something, anything, no matter how small. Look for what's next, what sparks a flicker of interest. Like Jung, sit in the void and allow a new narrative to emerge. Don't force it, just begin. 2. Commit. Once you find something that feels meaningful, even if it's small, you must have the courage to choose it. This is Darwin's lesson. Cut off the other options. True freedom isn't found in infinite possibility, it's found in commitment. Create clarity. 3. Avoid the traps. This is crucial. Stop comparing your journey to others, as Roosevelt tragically did. Their path is not your path. And just as importantly, stop comparing your present self to a glorified version of your past self. You are not who you were a year ago or 10 years ago. As Aldrin's story shows us, clinging to a past peak is the fastest way to self-destruct. You must let it go to move forward. And 4. Endure. Sometimes there are no easy answers. Sometimes the only thing to do is to endure. Like Lincoln, you just have to find the strength to get out of bed, to put one foot in front of the other, and to get on with the business of living, trusting that the path will eventually become clear through action, not just thought. So, that's the map. Explore, commit, avoid the traps, and endure. If this conversation resonated and you're looking for more thinking that doesn't talk down to you, make sure to subscribe. It's the single best way to ensure you don't miss the next one. And if you know someone who feels lost right now, share this with them. It might be the map they've been looking for.